Female pilots don't belong in attack aircraft. The words cut through the briefing room at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as Captain Brooklyn Hayes stood at attention, listening to Colonel Marcus Kane explain why she was being assigned to A-10 Thunderbolt training. At 27, with auburn hair pulled back in regulation style and steel blue eyes that had seen combat in 3 different theaters, she'd already proven herself flying F-16s and providing close air support for ground forces. But the A-10 Warthog was different, a flying tank designed for one purpose: destroying enemy positions with the most devastating aircraft-mounted weapon ever built. The GAU-8 Avenger 30mm cannon could fire 4,200 rounds per minute of depleted uranium shells, capable of shredding main battle tanks like paper. When enemy forces trapped an entire Marine battalion in a valley with no escape routes and every conventional rescue attempt had failed, Brooklyn would discover that sometimes the most dangerous pilot in the sky is the one everyone underestimated, flying a machine that turned skepticism into 4,000 rounds of pure destruction. Captain Brooklyn Hayes had been fighting for respect her entire military career, but nothing had prepared her for the reaction she received when she reported for A-10 Thunderbolt II training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The A-10 Warthog wasn't just another aircraft, it was a legend. Built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger 30mm cannon, the A-10 was specifically designed to provide close air support to ground forces, destroying enemy armor and fortifications with devastating effectiveness. The aircraft was ugly, slow by fighter standards, and absolutely lethal in the hands of a skilled pilot. But in 10 years of A-10 operations, no woman had ever been certified to fly the Warthog in combat. Brooklyn was about to become the first. "Hayes," announced Lieutenant Colonel David Sterling, the A-10 Training Squadron commander, as she entered the briefing room filled with male pilots. "Welcome to Warthog School. You're going to be learning to fly the most effective close air support aircraft ever built." The reaction from her fellow trainees was immediate and predictable. Snickers, whispered comments, and expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Brooklyn had dealt with similar reactions throughout her career, but the intensity was different here. Master Sergeant Rick Torres, a 20-year veteran who served as the squadron's senior enlisted advisor, spoke up during the briefing. "Sir, with respect, the A-10 is a different kind of aircraft. It requires physical strength, aggressive tactics, and the ability to operate in high-threat environments. Are we sure this is appropriate for mixed gender training?" Colonel Sterling's expression remained neutral. "Sergeant Torres, Captain Hayes has flown combat missions in F-16, has been decorated for valor under fire, and has demonstrated exceptional pilot skills. If she can handle a fighting Falcon, she can learn to handle a Warthog." First Lieutenant Jake Morrison, one of the senior students in the program, raised his hand. "Sir, no disrespect to Captain Hayes, but the A-10 isn't like other aircraft. When you're flying close air support, you're operating in environments where one mistake gets ground forces killed. The margins for error are 0. Brooklyn had remained silent during the discussion, but now she spoke for the first time. "Lieutenant Morrison, what's your combat flight time?" Morrison looked surprised by the direct question. "About 200 hours, ma'am." "I have 847 combat flight hours across 3 different aircraft types, including close air support missions. I've been shot at, I've engaged ground targets, and I've brought Marines home alive. The only difference between flying close air support in an F-16 and flying it in an A-10 is that the A-10 is specifically designed for the mission." The room went quiet. Colonel Sterling nodded approvingly. "Hayes is correct. The A-10 is built for close air support, and she has more relevant combat experience than anyone else in this room. Let's focus on training rather than assumptions." But Brooklyn knew that proving herself in the briefing room was different from proving herself in the cockpit of a Warthog. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was unlike any aircraft Brooklyn had ever flown. Where the F-16 was sleek, fast, and agile, the A-10 was angular, slow, and built like a flying tank. The entire aircraft was designed around the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that fired 30mm depleted uranium shells at rates up to 4,200 rounds per minute. Her first flight instructor was Major Sam Rodriguez, a combat veteran with 12 years of A-10 experience who had a reputation for being demanding but fair. "Hayes," he said as they walked around the aircraft during her first pre-flight inspection. "The A-10 is not about finesse. It's about getting into the fight, staying in the fight, and destroying whatever needs to be destroyed to keep ground forces alive. Everything about this aircraft is designed for survivability and firepower." He pointed to the aircraft's features as they completed the inspection: titanium armor protecting the pilot and critical systems, redundant flight controls, self-sealing fuel tanks, and the massive GAU-8 cannon that dominated the aircraft's center section. The gun fires depleted uranium shells that can penetrate main battle tank armor. When you pull the trigger, you're unleashing one of the most devastating weapons ever mounted on an aircraft. The question is, do you have what it takes to use it effectively? Brooklyn met his eyes steadily. "There's only one way to find out, sir." Her first flight in the A-10 was a revelation. The aircraft handled differently from anything she'd ever flown, heavier, more stable, but with a sense of power that was unlike any other military aircraft. When Major Rodriguez demonstrated the GAU-8 cannon on the gunnery range, firing short bursts at derelict tanks, Brooklyn watched 30mm shells tear through armor plating like it was cardboard. "That's what depleted uranium does to enemy armor," Rodriguez explained over the intercom. "Your job is to deliver that capability where ground forces need it most, when they need it most." Brooklyn's training progressed rapidly. She demonstrated exceptional skill in the fundamental aspects of A-10 operations: low-altitude flying, target identification, weapons delivery, and tactical maneuvering. But her fellow trainees remained skeptical. "She's good at the basic stuff," Lieutenant Morrison commented to other students after a training flight. "But combat is different. When you're getting shot at by surface-to-air missiles and you have to make split-second decisions that affect ground troops, that's when you find out what someone's really made of." Brooklyn overheard the comment but didn't respond. She'd learned that the best way to deal with skepticism was to let performance speak for itself. 2 weeks into her training, Brooklyn faced her first major evaluation, a complex close air support scenario where she would have to coordinate with ground forces, identify targets in a contested environment, and deliver precise weapons while avoiding simulated enemy air defenses. The scenario involved a Marine unit that had been ambushed while conducting a patrol in hostile territory. Enemy forces had superior numbers and were positioned in fortified locations that provided them with significant tactical advantages. Brooklyn's mission was to provide close air support that would allow the Marines to extract from the ambush zone. Flying at low altitude to avoid simulated surface-to-air missiles, Brooklyn coordinated with ground forces through radio communications while identifying target locations and planning her attack runs. "Viper 2-1, this is Grunt 6, came the voice of the Marine ground controller. "We've got enemy positions in buildings at coordinates Golf 7428. They've got us pinned down with automatic weapons and RPGs. Can you engage?" Brooklyn studied the target area through her targeting systems. The enemy positions were close to friendly forces, close enough that precision was critical to avoid friendly fire incidents. "Grunt 6, Viper 2-1, I have visual on enemy positions. Stand by for gun runs. Keep your heads down." She rolled into her first attack run, lining up the GAU-8 cannon on the enemy positions while maintaining the precise angle and distance needed to engage the targets without endangering friendly forces. Brooklyn fired a 2-second burst from the GAU-8, sending approximately 140 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium shells into the enemy positions. The simulated buildings were obliterated. "Viper 2-1, Grunt 6, outstanding shooting. Enemy positions neutralized. Marines are mobile." Brooklyn continued providing close air support for the next 20 minutes, engaging multiple enemy positions while coordinating with ground forces and avoiding simulated threats from enemy air defenses. When the exercise concluded, she had successfully eliminated all enemy positions while suffering no friendly fire incidents. Major Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the exercise from the ground, approached her after landing. "Hayes, that was some of the most precise close air support I've seen from a trainee. Your coordination with ground forces was excellent, your target identification was perfect, and your weapons delivery was textbook. Thank you, sir. But more importantly, you demonstrated something that can't be taught, the ability to make split-second decisions under pressure while keeping the safety of ground forces paramount. That's what separates good A-10 pilots from great ones." Brooklyn's performance during the evaluation changed how her fellow trainees viewed her capabilities. The skepticism didn't disappear entirely, but it was replaced by a grudging respect for her skills. Lieutenant Morrison approached her after the debriefing. "Hayes, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about what you could handle based on prejudice rather than evidence. What you did out there today was professional-level flying." "Thank you, Morrison. I appreciate that. Can I ask you something? Where did you learn to fly close air support like that? That kind of precision usually takes years to develop." Brooklyn thought about her answer carefully. "I've been in situations where precision was the difference between Marines going home alive or not. When you've seen what happens when close air support goes wrong, you develop very high standards for what good enough means." Morrison nodded slowly. "Makes sense. Hayes, I'm glad you're going to be flying Warthogs. Ground forces deserve pilots who take the responsibility seriously." Brooklyn completed A-10 training at the top of her class and was assigned to the 354 Fighter Squadron at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Her first operational deployment came 6 months later, when her squadron was sent to a forward operating base in a contested region where American and Allied ground forces were conducting counterinsurgency operations. The deployment began routinely, providing close air support for ground patrols, conducting armed reconnaissance missions, and maintaining air superiority in the region. Brooklyn flew dozens of missions without encountering significant enemy activity. But that changed dramatically during her 7th week of deployment. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces had been massing in a remote valley approximately 100 kilometers from the main Allied base. A Marine reconnaissance battalion had been sent to investigate the enemy buildup and assess the threat to Allied operations. What they found was far worse than intelligence had suggested. The valley contained a heavily fortified enemy complex with more than 200 fighters, advanced weapon systems, and what appeared to be preparations for a major offensive against Allied positions. The Marine battalion had been detected during their reconnaissance mission and found themselves surrounded by superior enemy forces in terrain that provided no escape routes. Brooklyn was part of a 4-ship A-10 formation that was scrambled to provide emergency close air support for the trapped Marines. But as they approached the target area, the tactical situation deteriorated rapidly. "Viper flight, this is AWACS," came the voice of the airborne early warning controller. "We're showing multiple surface-to-air missile sites in your target area. Threat level is high. Approach with caution." Brooklyn checked her defensive systems and confirmed that her electronic countermeasures were active. The A-10 was built to survive in high-threat environments, but surface-to-air missiles remained a serious danger. "Viper 2, this is Grunt Actual," the Marine Battalion commander's voice crackled over the radio. "We are surrounded by approximately 200 enemy fighters in fortified positions. They've got us pinned down in a valley with no escape routes. We need immediate close air support, or we're going to be overrun." Brooklyn studied the tactical display, showing the Marines' position and the enemy positions surrounding them. The situation was as bad as it could be. Friendly forces surrounded, superior enemy numbers, difficult terrain, and advanced enemy air defenses. "Grunt Actual, Viper 2, what's your ammunition status?" "Running low on everything. We've been in continuous contact for 6 hours. Casualties are mounting." Brooklyn made a tactical decision that would define the rest of the mission. Instead of waiting for the other A-10s to coordinate a complex attack plan, she would engage immediately while her wingmen provided suppressive fire against the enemy air defenses. "Viper flight, Viper 2, I'm going in hot. Cover me against SAM sights. Viper 2, Viper lead, negative. We need to coordinate this attack to minimize risk. Brooklyn was already rolling into her first attack run. Viper lead, Marines are dying down there. I'm engaging now. She dropped to low altitude and identified the first group of enemy positions, a cluster of buildings where enemy fighters were directing fire at the trapped Marines. The range was perfect for the GAU-8 cannon, and the target was clear of friendly forces. Brooklyn lined up her shot and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with the distinctive sound that had earned the A-10 its nickname, a deep ripping noise that sounded like the sky being torn apart. For 3 seconds, Brooklyn fired the cannon, sending approximately 630 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium shells into the enemy positions. The buildings disintegrated. Viper 2, grunt actual, outstanding shooting, enemy position destroyed. Marines are able to reposition. But Brooklyn was already lining up her second attack run. She had identified a group of enemy vehicles that appeared to be moving reinforcements toward the Marines' position. Her second gun run eliminated 4 enemy vehicles and scattered the reinforcements they were carrying. Viper 2, this is Viper lead. You're drawing heavy ground fire. Recommend you egress and let us coordinate a safer approach. Brooklyn could see tracers from enemy small arms fire reaching toward her aircraft, but the A-10's armor was designed to withstand exactly this kind of ground fire. She continued her attacks. Over the next 40 minutes, Brooklyn conducted 12 separate attack runs against enemy positions surrounding the Marine battalion. Each run was precisely planned to eliminate enemy fighters while avoiding any possibility of friendly fire incidents. Her wingmen provided suppressive fire against enemy air defense sites, but Brooklyn did the majority of the close air support work, systematically destroying enemy positions with the GAU-8 cannon. By the time she concluded her attacks, she had expended nearly 4,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition, almost her entire combat load. Viper 2, grunt actual, all enemy positions around our perimeter have been neutralized. Marines are mobile and moving to extraction point. Outstanding work. Brooklyn checked her ammunition counter, 73 rounds remaining out of 1,174 rounds loaded before the mission. Grunt actual, Viper 2, glad we could help. Stay safe down there. As Brooklyn returned to base, she reflected on the mission that had just concluded. In 40 minutes of combat, she had eliminated approximately 60 enemy fighters and destroyed their defensive positions, allowing an entire Marine battalion to extract from what would have been a devastating ambush. But more importantly, she had demonstrated something that her skeptics had questioned, that female pilots could handle the A-10 Thunderbolt II in the most demanding combat conditions imaginable. When she landed and shut down her aircraft, Brooklyn was met by Colonel Sterling, who had been monitoring the mission from the operations center. Hayes, I just reviewed the mission tapes in the ground commander's after-action report. What you accomplished out there was exceptional. You single-handedly provided close air support that saved an entire Marine battalion. Thank you, sir. Just doing my job. No, Hayes, what you did was far beyond just doing your job. You made tactical decisions under extreme pressure, delivered precision fires in a complex tactical environment, and demonstrated exactly why we train A-10 pilots to the highest standards. Colonel Sterling paused, then continued. Hayes, there's something else. The Marine Battalion Commander has recommended you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Your actions today directly saved the lives of approximately 400 Marines who would have been killed or captured if you hadn't been able to break up that ambush. Brooklyn felt the weight of responsibility that came with flying close air support missions. Sir, I had excellent training, a reliable aircraft, and Marines on the ground who deserved everything I could give them. That's exactly the right attitude, Hayes. But I want you to understand something. What you proved today wasn't just that you can fly the A-10 in combat. You proved that the best pilot for any mission is the one with the skills, judgment, and commitment to get the job done, regardless of gender. 3 weeks later, Brooklyn received word that she was being assigned to the A-10 Weapons School, the Air Force's premier program for developing expert close air support pilots and tactics. Lieutenant Morrison, who had become one of her strongest supporters, congratulated her on the assignment. Hayes, weapons school is the top level of A-10 flying. You'll be learning advanced tactics from the best pilots in the Air Force, then coming back to teach those tactics to the next generation of Warthog pilots. I'm honored by the opportunity. You've earned it. What you did during that Marine extraction mission has become legendary. People are calling it one of the best examples of close air support in modern warfare. Brooklyn thought about the Marines who had gone home to their families because of her actions that day, about the skepticism she'd faced when she first arrived at A-10 training, and about the responsibility that came with flying an aircraft designed to protect ground forces. Morrison, when I first got here, a lot of people questioned whether female pilots belonged in attack aircraft. I hope what happened out there demonstrated that the most important qualification for any pilot is competence, not gender. Morrison nodded. Hayes, after watching what you can do with a Warthog, I think anyone who questions female pilots in combat aircraft needs to have their head examined. You've changed a lot of minds around here. Brooklyn's success in the A-10 opened doors that had previously been closed to female pilots. Within 6 months of her combat mission, the Air Force announced that all combat aircraft positions would be fully integrated, with assignments based solely on qualifications and performance. She became an instructor at the A-10 Weapons School, teaching advanced close air support tactics to pilots from around the world. Her mission over the Marine Battalion became a case study in precision close air support, analyzed and taught to demonstrate the importance of pilot skill, aircraft capability, and tactical decision-making under pressure. But Brooklyn's influence extended far beyond teaching tactics. Her success inspired a generation of female pilots who had been told they couldn't handle combat aircraft, couldn't operate in high-threat environments, couldn't make the split-second decisions required for close air support missions. Major Sarah Chen, one of Brooklyn's first students at weapons school, would later comment, "Captain Hayes didn't just prove that women could fly the A-10. She proved that excellence in combat aviation has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, training, and the willingness to do whatever is necessary to complete the mission." Brooklyn's combat record became legendary within the close air support community. She flew 127 combat missions during her career, providing close air support for ground forces in multiple theaters of operation. She was credited with destroying more than 200 enemy vehicles in defensive positions while maintaining a perfect record of 0 friendly fire incidents. Her techniques for coordinating with ground forces, identifying targets in complex environments, and delivering precision fires became standard curriculum at the A-10 Weapons School and other advanced training programs. But Brooklyn's most important contribution wasn't tactical. It was cultural. Her success fundamentally changed how the military viewed female pilots' capabilities in combat roles. The arguments about physical strength, aggressive tactics, and high-threat operations were permanently settled by her record of exceptional performance under the most demanding conditions imaginable. General Patricia Hayes, commander of Air Combat Command and no relation to Brooklyn, spoke at her retirement ceremony. Captain Hayes didn't just excel at flying the A-10 Thunderbolt II. She redefined what excellence means in close air support aviation. Her record of precision, professionalism, and life-saving combat performance will be studied and emulated for decades to come. Brooklyn's final flight in the A-10 was a training mission where she demonstrated advanced close air support techniques to a group of young pilots, both male and female, who had grown up in an Air Force where her success had made gender integration in combat aviation a non-issue. As she climbed out of the cockpit for the last time, one of her students, Second Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, asked her what advice she would give to female pilots entering combat aviation. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, my advice is the same for everyone, regardless of gender. Train harder than anyone expects you to, hold yourself to higher standards than anyone demands of you, and never forget that when ground forces call for close air support, they don't care about your gender or your politics or your personal story. They care about whether you can deliver devastating firepower exactly where they need it, when they need it, with the precision that keeps them alive. Brooklyn paused, looking at the A-10 that had been her mount for 8 years of combat operations. And remember that every time you pull the trigger on that GAU-8 cannon, you're not just firing depleted uranium shells. You're firing proof that competence transcends every artificial limitation anyone ever tried to place on you. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of women in combat aviation, Brooklyn's mission over the Marine Battalion would be cited as a turning point, the moment when questions about female pilots' capabilities were definitively answered by 4,000 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium shells delivered with surgical precision. The skeptics who had questioned whether women could handle the A-10 Thunderbolt II learned that the most dangerous pilot in any cockpit wasn't determined by gender, but by skill, training, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to bring ground forces home alive. Brooklyn Hayes had proven that when Marines are trapped and dying, the only thing that matters is the pilot who can deliver devastating firepower exactly where it's needed, when it's needed, with the precision that separates professionals from pretenders. The A-10 Warthog was built around its gun. Brooklyn Hayes had proven she was built to use it, and in proving that, she had opened the sky to every woman who would follow in her contrails, carrying forward the legacy that competence knows no gender, excellence accepts no limits, and when the mission demands perfection, the best pilot is simply the best pilot, regardless of anything else. The story of Brooklyn Hayes became more than military history. It became inspiration for a generation of aviators who learned that artificial barriers crumble before real performance, that skepticism dissolves under the weight of results, and that the most powerful weapon against prejudice is not argument, but achievement. Her legacy lived on in every female pilot who climbed into a cockpit, knowing that the path had been cleared by someone who refused to accept limitations, who chose to respond to doubt with excellence, and who proved that when lives hang in the balance, the only qualification that matters is the ability to save them. Brooklyn Hayes hadn't just learned to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt II. She had transformed what it meant to be a pilot, and she had done it 4,000 rounds at a time, with precision that saved lives and shattered stereotypes in equal measure. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with enemy forces, sometimes they're fought with expectations, assumptions, and limitations that exist only in the minds of people who have never seen what excellence actually looks like when it takes to the sky and starts shooting. Brooklyn Hayes had shown them what excellence looked like, and it looked exactly like victory. The influence of Brooklyn's success rippled through the entire military aviation community in ways that continued to surprise even her. Within 2 years of her legendary rescue mission, applications from women to military flight training programs increased by 340%. The number of female pilots completing advanced combat training jumped from a handful per year to dozens, but the impact extended beyond just numbers. The culture of military aviation began to shift in fundamental ways. Training programs that had once focused on physical strength requirements were redesigned to emphasize skill, precision, and tactical decision-making. Evaluation criteria that had inadvertently favored certain physical characteristics were replaced with assessments that measured actual combat effectiveness. Colonel Sterling, who had overseen Brooklyn's initial training, was promoted to brigadier general and tasked with developing new standards for combat pilot selection. His new guidelines, known informally as the Hayes Protocol, focused entirely on demonstrated capability rather than assumed limitations. Captain Hayes taught us something profound, General Sterling explained during a conference on military aviation standards. We learned that our assumptions about what makes an effective combat pilot were often wrong. Physical size, gender, background, none of those predicted performance as accurately as we thought they did. What predicted performance was skill, judgment, and the ability to execute under pressure. The transformation wasn't just philosophical, it was practical. Flight training programs began incorporating Brooklyn's techniques for precision targeting, her methods for coordinating with ground forces, and her approaches to tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. Young pilots, both male and female, studied her mission tapes not just to learn about the A-10's capabilities, but to understand how exceptional pilots think during combat. Her radio communications from that day became textbook examples of how to coordinate complex close air support operations while managing multiple threats. Captain Jennifer Torres, who had been inspired by Brooklyn's example to become the second woman certified for A-10 combat operations, described the impact of having a precedent. When I went through training, nobody questioned whether women could handle the Warthog. That question had been answered. The only question was whether I, individually, had what it took to meet the standards Captain Hayes had established. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Brooklyn's legacy was how it changed the conversation about capability versus assumption in military contexts. Her success became a case study not just in aviation, but in leadership development, personnel management, and organizational effectiveness. Military academies began teaching courses on cognitive bias and assumption management, using Brooklyn's story as a prime example of how preconceived notions could prevent organizations from utilizing their best talent effectively. The Marine Battalion commander whose unit Brooklyn had saved, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson, became one of the most vocal advocates for capability-based assignments throughout the military. His after-action report, which detailed how Brooklyn's precision and tactical judgment had saved 400 Marine lives, was cited in congressional hearings on military effectiveness and equal opportunity. Captain Hayes didn't save my Marines because she was trying to prove a point, Thompson testified. She saved them because she was the best pilot available for that mission at that moment. Her gender was irrelevant. Her skill was everything. The ripple effects continued for years. Defense contractors began redesigning aircraft interfaces and equipment based on broader ranges of pilot physiology. Training programs started emphasizing adaptability and precision over brute force approaches to aircraft control. Most importantly, a generation of young women who had never considered military aviation as a career path began to see it as not just possible, but as a field where they could excel and make meaningful contributions. Brooklyn's story became required reading at the Air Force Academy, where cadets learned that breaking barriers wasn't about making statements. It was about performing so exceptionally that barriers became irrelevant. As she reflected on her career during her final interview before retirement, Brooklyn was asked what she hoped her legacy would be. "I hope people remember that the mission always comes first," she said. "When Marines are pinned down and need close air support, the only thing that matters is putting ordnance exactly where it needs to go, when it needs to go there, with the precision that brings everyone home alive. Everything else, politics, assumptions, expectations, is just noise." She paused, then added, "But if my career helped clear the way for other qualified people to contribute their best abilities to the mission, regardless of what anyone assumed about their limitations, then maybe we're all a little safer because of it." Brooklyn Hayes had started her career fighting for respect and acceptance. She ended it having transformed an entire profession's understanding of what excellence looked like. And she had done it not through argument or advocacy, but through the simple, devastating effectiveness of being undeniably exceptionally good at the job when it mattered most. The A-10 Thunderbolt II continued to serve as the backbone of American close air support operations. But now it flew with pilots who had been selected and trained according to standards that prioritized capability over assumptions, performance over prejudice, and mission effectiveness over everything else. Brooklyn Hayes had taught the military how to find and develop its best pilots, and in doing so, she had made everyone safer. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.